You're listening to Smart Moves with your hosts, Ann Riley Caldwell and Matt Wilson.
Hey, welcome to the Smart Moves podcast. We're so excited to have you here. I'm Ann Riley Caldwell, not your ordinary agent, Realtor in Middle Tennessee, and I'm here with my co-host, the amazing Matt Wilson, Mr. Loan Officer, Branch Manager of New American Funding. And today we have a compelling, everybody's going to want to watch this one. We're going to try to make it interesting, so stick around for the stories as we go. It is Don't Get Burned by the Contract, the Tennessee Purchase and Sale Agreement that governs almost every real estate transaction here in Tennessee. So we're going to talk about strategy when we're filling it out. When I'm representing a buyer, we're going to talk about strategy from the seller side, and Matt's going to tell us not all the things he's seen, would be here for like days, but lots of things that he's seen, both good and bad, on the lending side, what creates problems that you don't want. We're going to look at contract contingencies. We'll talk about what that means, and make sure that you as a buyer or seller, you know a lot more than hopefully you did before you started listening or watching this podcast. So anyway, we're actually going to take it from the top, so bear with us on this. So at the very beginning, we have a buyer name, maybe one or more, and we have a seller name, maybe one or more. The reason we bring this up is because it's very important. It really helps on the buyer side that you are using the same name when you're doing your loan documents as well as when you're doing contract documents. So if you're using a middle initial, if you're using a middle name, if you're not using a middle name, it's also important to know who the buyer is, because sometimes there's reasons to leave people off as a buyer. There's sometimes reasons to put people on as a buyer. So, Matt, what do you have on the buyer side real quick that people should think about?
Yeah, the name's a big deal. There's been plenty of times where we get halfway through the process and then find out that you don't actually want to be titled the way that your name appears on the contract. Biggest example I've ever seen was a fella named Nate or Nathan or Nathaniel, depending on what day of the week it was. And that caused a few problems along the way because we needed to have a power of attorney in that particular situation. And when it happened, the power of attorney didn't line up verbatim with what they had on the contract. So now it's a different person, even though, a reasonable person could say it's the same, but that's just how legal documents work. Likewise, the other thing to factor in there is like if you've got two spouses and one of you is going to be on the mortgage and one of you is not, the one that's not doesn't need to be in the buyer line here. So that's usually a fast call to Ann Riley for an amendment as soon as we see those come through, if we know that one party's the only one that's going to be on there.
Yeah, and I usually try to ask those questions ahead of time, but occasionally things happen. But hopefully I'm representing the seller at that point and not the buyer. So it wasn't my fault. Power of attorney, again, can't give you legal advice, but I know stuff. That would be a situation where the person's not going to probably be able to be at closing or actually do a remote closing. So they're going to have somebody else sign documents on their behalf. And so, yes, all of those need to line up with all the documentation that's happened prior to the closing. I'll go ahead and talk about sellers for just a minute, and then I'll circle back around. Same thing. Got to know who's actually able to sell the property, and the names are consistent across the board there too. What I see a lot of times also, we often think of individuals buying property, which is probably what we see a lot. But of course, there are companies that are buying and selling property, LLCs, S corporations. Obviously, builders, almost always they're a company. It's hardly ever the individual who is the actual builder. In those instances, it gets a little bit more dicey because we really have to make sure the name matches up and also that they have certain documents showing that they are an actual entity, an LLC in the state of Tennessee, able to do business here, things like that. And then, of course, both on the lender side as well as the title company side, there are some documents that will have to be produced in order to prove those things. And so a lot of people just slap something on, fill out one form, and they don't have an operating agreement or they don't have other documents, or They don't have, sometimes you have to have documents that give you permission to actually sell a piece of property or buy a piece of property, because there's multiple people in the company that have to agree to that depending upon all kinds of circumstances. So what have you seen kind of in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen plenty of times where you've got like a deceased family member, and then whoever is in charge of the estate just kind of YOLOs it without legal advice. And next thing you know, it's like you get title work in, and you're like, this individual does not match this individual. What in the world's going on here? So, in those situations, you've got to make sure that whatever estate plan's gone on has actually taken to effect before doing that, because I've had some contracts in the past get held up by the probate court because they had just started that process, and the court system's not frequently super fast in those situations. Likewise, I've seen several situations where you've got, like you were talking about, an entity that owns the property, and Bob signs it, but Bob's not actually the one authorized to sign the contract. So then you got to go find Tom, the guy that is allowed to, and get him to redo everything for you. Because, that would be like me just deciding that I'm going to sign to sell your property. I'm just some rando. I can't do that.
Yeah, and on the probate side, that's a whole nother podcast. I can't give legal advice. I do work on the side with probate attorneys and real estate attorneys. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with that. And I see all kinds of situations where I call the listing agent and they don't have any idea what I'm talking about when I start asking questions like, is this really the administrator or executor of the estate, or these heirs? Does it need to be in the name of the estate, or is it okay if the executor sells it? They don't know. So just a hint, if you're in a probate situation, you're talking to a listing agent and they don't have a clue, that should probably be a clue. You might just want to talk to somebody else. But anyway, I've actually had a listing agent say to me, "Oh, I don't ever care. I just let title figure it out later." We'll be here all day if I go into that. But yeah, that's not the right answer. Just so you know. Okay, after that, we get to the exciting address. This can actually cause some issues. So one of the things that I always do is make sure that the tax ID number is on. Right now it's line 9 for this year, because it's amazing that sometimes there are multiple pieces of property that have the same address, and particularly in certain counties and a lot of times land, it starts with a 0. And sometimes there's multiple pieces of property that seem to want to have an address that started with 0. I've also, even in Nashville, Tennessee, had houses that sit on a corner, and in one instance, the mailing address is this street, but the actual property address for tax records is this street. So you would be surprised how tricky even this can be. So anyway, do you have any fun stories about that one?
Yeah, actually I do. I had exactly what you were just talking about, where the mailing address and actual address were two different things. Had, the lot spanned 2 streets basically. It was a sandwich between 2 different roads. So we had to get the contract corrected whenever we got everything in from title and realized what nobody apparently did, and that's that the address was actually totally wrong. We kind of had to hit the reset button on the whole file on that one.
Okay, so the next part of the contract, Matt probably has something about this too. I always tell people, both buyers and sellers, read lines what are now 12 to 22, and I refer to those specifically because in the purchase and sale agreement, there are certain items in a home that are assumed and actually contractually supposed to be included when the home gets sold. A few of those, light fixtures, obviously HVAC, window treatments, landscaping, certain outdoor lights, mailboxes, antennas, and satellite dishes, which can cause problems because a lot of times those actually can't stay because they're being leased by somebody. But anyway, I tell people you need to read through this because if you're a seller, you need to realize that those items, you cannot take them, which I've had some sellers actually do. And then that creates an issue at the final walkthrough because they didn't listen to me and read it like they were supposed to and walked in and went, where did all the window blinds go? Light fixtures can actually be a big deal. You would be surprised how attached some people are to their attached light fixtures. So anyway, there are places that we're going to get to in a second. I mean, you can take out those things. So if you're a seller and you really want to take a light fixture with you, then you just need to make sure a couple lines down that item says it will not remain with the property. And if you're a buyer and there's any items here that you don't want, you want the seller to get rid of them because you don't want to deal with it, then you also need to say that those items will not remain with the property. Also, if there's any landscaping items, things that aren't maybe very clear, it's much better to have those conversations up front before people either get left with something they didn't want or they take off with something that was supposed to stay behind. Any fun stories about that?
Usually it's on that line 23 B there, section B there, where it's got the items that remain with the property at no additional cost. In particular with like vacation type short-term rental properties, a lot of the times those will convey with like furniture and bedding and all the things. You're kind of getting a turnkey vacation home. Basically, be as vague but specific as possible from a lending standpoint right there. I know that's an oxymoron. We don't want to know that there's 400 thread count, silk sheets or whatever. We don't really care. The biggest thing for us is make sure that if it is going to remain, that you leave it there and don't go get fancy later in the contract and the special steps, because that causes problems, because you can't have anything that's going to cause an additional expense. That's the biggest key factor right there. So if you guys decide that when I bought my house, we bought the fancy frame TV that was here when we moved in. That's between us and the seller. That wasn't part of the mortgage transaction, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. We just made that happen. That sort of stuff happens frequently. I've seen it happen with clients where they've got a fridge, like the garage fridge, or something like that. But you don't want to make that part of the official contract, because it doesn't fly through lending, because we can't give any value to garden gnome collection out front or anything weird like that. What are you going to do with that? So that's the biggest thing I've seen on that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time I try to limit it to basic kitchen appliances, washer, dryer. I always tell people if anything is too close to being a personal item, then yes, because I've had people buy furniture and I'm like, you guys need to put that in a separate agreement, because that's not going in here, because it's just going to get kicked by the lender. So anyway, there are places here for what's remaining and what's not remaining, and it's better to deal with all that up front. The next section we get to is leased items, and any items that are leased. I see that with security systems. I see that with water softeners in some parts of Middle Tennessee. Fuel tanks, propane tanks, if the fireplace or something is being run by those, or a generator or something of that nature. Generators, hot topic now at the time that we're filming this. So sometimes satellite dishes for TV, internet purposes. So those things, again, need to be discussed, because some companies will allow the buyer to take over the lease of something, and some companies will not. So a lot of times the sellers need to call those companies and see if it's even possible to leave it behind and have it moved over into the buyer name. Many times the buyer prefers to just get rid of them, have the seller not, work it out to give it back or to do something with it, and then just start over and have their own account with some of these companies. So anyway, I don't see that a lot, but it definitely comes up every once in a while. Do you guys have do you care one way or the other, as long as it gets taken care of?
As long as it's agreed to take care of, the lending doesn't matter. In my personal experience, outside of the lending world, but just me personally, when I bought this house, the sellers had a water softener, like whole house water filter system. And they all but begged us to take the thing. And I was like, I'm not interested in a $6,000 water filter. I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was a doozy. And let me tell you, the water tastes no different out of the refrigerator now than it did the day that we moved in, because they didn't get it out of the house in time for closing. So we just kind of were nice and let it happen anyway. We were also homeless, so that contributed. But anyway, they had to have somebody come in after we lived here to remove that system for them, because I wasn't going to. I'm not a plumber. I'm not interested in all that action, and I also wasn't interested in a $6,000 water filter, because a Brita costs a lot less than that, and so does the ones that go in my refrigerator.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. There you go. See, lesson learned.
Yeah.
Careful what you might end up with. It sounds exciting in the moment. Obviously, if it's paid for, might be a different scenario, but. So next up, we have purchase price. We could stay here all day. So what I'm going to say about the purchase price, a few highlights, I guess, is one, make sure you know what's in the contract. Two, we will have had so many strategic discussions about it, hopefully by the time that we write a purchase price in there. I'm going to be running comps on houses, which is comparables of other houses similar to the house that a buyer's trying to buy. Obviously, on the listing side, there's already a list price. Maybe comps were run, maybe not, depends on who your agent was. But if I'm your agent as a seller, we already would have an idea of what your house was worth, which is hopefully how we got to the list price. There's just so much strategy when it comes to purchase price. And then obviously on Matt's side, one of the things that my buyers are always talking to him about, I'm always sending him the MLS sheet so he can pull taxes and HOA fees and other things. If we're pushing the price point for what you're pre-approved for, pre-underwritten for, wherever you are in the process, that you feel comfortable, that if nothing changes with this purchase price and the seller accepts it, that you're going to be able to actually close. Obviously, that is the biggest thing. So any thoughts? I'm sure you have a million thoughts, but high points?
I mean, on our end, the purchase price is the purchase price. So, whenever you're talking to your agent, that's hopefully Ann Riley, you guys have got that nailed down, and then we just follow along. Just, preferably don't make it higher than your pre-approval. That helps things a whole lot.
Yep, exactly. And obviously, the strategy behind all these things that we're talking about, it comes from what do you want? What does the seller want? If I'm not representing the seller, all the parties have to agree on it. So ultimately, that's what's going to dictate what happens to this offer. Because right now, we're talking about it as an offer. I guess at this point, once it gets signed by everybody, it becomes the actual contract that Matt and his team deal with. But anyway, yeah, we will have lots of discussions. And we'll also be talking about the purchase price when we get to appraisals and other things coming up. So your next choice is, are you going to have a finance contingency or not? So contingencies are things in a contract that have to be met. And if they aren't met, then certain things would have to happen. Oftentimes, if you can't meet a financial contingency, one option in certain circumstances is the contract will terminate, either automatically or there will be an option to terminate it by one of the parties. So if you're doing a cash deal, then, your financing contingency likely will be waived, because at that point, you're just paying cash, and you're going to have to show that to the seller, usually up front or within a certain number of days of going under contract, by either showing them a bank statement, getting your investment advisor or banker to write a letter or something like that. A huge percentage obviously have a financing contingency. So if you are getting a loan, I would say no matter how small that loan may be, you definitely want to make sure that you're doing the financing contingency. There's a blank that you have to be able to get a loan in a principal amount up to a certain percentage of your purchase price. So that for some people is 100% because they're doing 100% loan. For some people, that could be 10, 20, 30, 50% depending upon what they're doing. So one, you want to make sure it matches what you've been talking to Matt about, worst case scenario. There might be reasons to bump up that percentage. You can talk to me about why. If it is appropriate for your situation. But if for some reason, you also have your loan types, if you're doing conventional, FHA, USDA, VA, etc., that come in to play, just so that the seller and all the parties know what type of loan that you're going to be getting. Any thoughts on that percentage and strategies or things that matter?
Yeah, from a lending perspective on the percentage, I've had agents in the past get really worked up about being exact on that. I would just go with whatever the highest possibility is. For example, if you've got somebody that may do an FHA loan and put 3.5% down, or may do down payment assistance and do 0 down, just go ahead and put 100 because it's an up to number. That's been my philosophy on that. On the lending end, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're not going to be required to line up the mortgage with that. Like, if you decide maybe you get a sweet scratch off ticket, now you got a gigantic down payment in the middle of the process. Okay, cool. We can change that percentage on our end just fine. And I promise you the seller's not going to care. So there's that. As far as the other piece there, where it's the checkboxes for the different loan types, again, on our end, it doesn't really matter. We can do whatever we want. But from the integrity of the offer standpoint, correct me if I'm wrong, sellers could potentially use it as grounds to go with a different offer if you flip loan types and they're not okay with that, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things probably that a seller and their listing agent is going to look at, because, condition of the home usually makes the biggest difference if somebody's trying to do FHA or VA, etc. So if any sellers have thoughts that maybe something is going on with their home, maybe they've even already disclosed it, or it's something obvious like a big hole in the wall, or things that could raise a red flag, and they don't want to have to maybe pay to fix them in order to get to closing, then they might very well go with a conventional loan. There's a lot of conventional wisdom out there, that conventional loans are better. So that's another whole conversation that we will have. So anyway, yes, I mean, as a seller, if the listing agent, understands the differences between these things, if the home's in really good shape, it probably matters less. Just because there's a lot of people, Matt can attest to, that could do a conventional or an FHA loan. And if you know about them, I think if you ask somebody on the street, if they know enough, they would probably say a conventional loan. Why would you not ever want to do that? But sometimes an FHA loan in somebody's specific circumstance is actually what they choose for different reasons.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and another example, there's VA. Most of the VA buyers that I assist, like, they could have gone conventional, but VA just made more financial sense for their situation, so we did that. And some sellers don't want to accept a VA loan. I find that offensive as a veteran, but we'll leave that there. As far as the loan obligations section down there right below that, it says 3 days after the binding agreement date, buyer shall make application for the loan. That's kind of a misnomer, because if you filled out your application online somewhere before the contract, you may think I've made application. But from a legal standpoint, you haven't made application till the address is there. So that's you've made your application when you tell me, hey, here's the contract. This is the address for the property that we're attempting to purchase. So that's really what it boils down to. I've had agents in the past, unfortunately, where they disappear, and then like a week later, I'm like, hey, how'd things go with that one deal and or that one offer? And they say, oh yeah, we've got a contract. Well, probably by definition, if you haven't told me that 3 days later, you may not have a contract if anybody cares. And then the thing is too, insurance. I run into a lot right there. It says you got 14 days to get insurance. I run into a lot of buyers that wait until the 11th hour of the transaction to get insurance lined up. Trust me, we're begging for insurance from like the second day we've got a contract in. But some people just wait too long, and that could put you in jeopardy too. And I see it all the time, that it's well past 14 days before we're actually seeing it on our end. So I can assure you they ain't been shopping it ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I would say when it comes to these particular deadlines we're on page 2, guys. So many agents just blow right past these and don't bother to do them. Like, they don't bother to send the notice. They don't bother to make sure that their clients have met those deadlines. And, there is a provision that, it can be demanded. And then the buyer has 2 days in order to comply, or the seller could use it to get out of the contract. So, just because a lot of people don't do it doesn't mean it's a good practice. I try to always make sure when I'm representing the buyer that they do it. Honestly, if I'm a listing agent, hopefully there's nothing wrong with this, but I use it strategically. I don't usually have the seller ask for compliance until or unless somebody raises their hand and tries to make a better offer, in which case it could be a way for a seller to get out of the current agreement and go take a better offer. So, there are things here like this that a lot of people really truly don't understand them, and they can be used, that all of a sudden you're a buyer who's no longer under contract because, you can't scramble around and get an insurance quote within that 2-day period of time. And now all of a sudden the contract terminated. So anyway, I would just suggest going ahead and sending the notices. It's a piece of paper with a checkbox that a buyer signs. It's not hard. So anyway,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't do it.
I've also seen people that decide after they've got a contract to go start shopping for a mortgage again.
Oh,
And when that happens, if you're spending 3 or 4 days looking for it, you're out of contract by definition. Not to mention the fact that they accepted your offer with whatever pre-approval you presented. So you're changing the terms of your side of the agreement by doing so at that point. I'm not saying don't shop for mortgages, but like my company, we got the ability to shop across 200 different lenders. So it gives us, you don't have to go do all that. I do the hard part for you. We do the heavy lifting. But anyway, that is something that I've seen some people that are trying to be savvy do and get themselves into a real predicament in the middle of their contract.
yeah, and we do have to update, like if you're the buyer, you do need to update the seller as soon as possible if you are going to change lenders, and we take it from there. But yeah, it's also important to know that, because what Matt said is not what every lender does or is capable of doing. So, they're not shopping a lot of different places for you. So good questions to ask up front so you understand what's happening behind the scenes. So as always, we are here to help you make your moves as smooth and easy and strategic and smart as possible. And this purchase and sale agreement, it goes on for like 11 pages. So we're going to take a break here, and we're going to do a part 2 of this that's going to pick up when we start talking about the closing date. We made it through almost pretty much all the financial parts and some of the legal parts at the very beginning. So we can't wait to see you on the next episode, because there's a whole lot more that you need to know to make sure you don't get burned by the purchase and sale agreement.